On February 8, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a sermon at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. I would like to read you a little bit of his speech. Quote, "If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell him not to talk too long. Every now and then, I wonder what I want him to say. Tell him not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That's not important. Tell him not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That isn't important. Tell him not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I've tried to be right in the walk with them. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe all to a naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. And I want you to say that I tried to love and serve all humanity. So on this January 18th, 2021, we will remember Martin Luther King Jr. We will remember the man who won a Congressional Gold Medal, a Medal of Freedom, a Grammy, a Nobel Peace Prize, at least 50 honorary degrees from colleges and universities across the nation. We will honor that man because that's pretty impressive. But I think most importantly, we will remember a man who had a dream. A man who had a dream, and he believed that dream. So he dedicated his entire life, his entire career, to making that dream come true. And we are a better nation because of that.
Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most influential people in American history. He stood with the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s. He stood with Black people, he stood with Asians, he stood with Indians, he stood with Native Americans, he stood with all races. He believed that you should not be judged based on your race or ethnicity. He wanted his children to grow up in a world where they were not looked at differently because of the color of their skin or their background. He did all of this through his speeches. He never supported violence. He believed that if you were going to change things, you needed to do it through love and through peace. There was going to be no change if all there was war and fighting. Sadly, he was assassinated in 1968, but his legacy lives on every year. You learn about it every year in school, and his teachings still stand true in the events of this year and years that passed.
Hi, my name is Ryan Kiragu, and I want to talk about who Martin Luther King Jr. is to me and what he presents. Martin Luther King Jr. is a lot to me. He's not just someone who I look up to, an idol, but someone that I want to be when I grow up. And the message that he sent out, which I quote, "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character." And the holiday of which it presents is how much we have changed in the past 60 years, and I'm really thankful for that change. And I want to say that a lot of people cannot go to school, cannot be judged just by their religion or skin color, and that's really great, and I'm really happy for that. And that holiday represents of how much has changed, and I'm really thankful. And I want you guys to have a great Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I hope that you may also contribute to that change. Thank you.
Martin Luther King Jr. Day means to me millions of people coming together to celebrate a man who stood for what he believed in, which was justice and equality. This is still a relevant issue in today's society because this is a problem that we are dealing with even in this era. What his message means to me is equality for everyone and not to judge anybody by what they look like. It only matters what's on the inside. What the importance of this day is to always remember that there is hope and that everybody, no matter their color, shape, or size, matters. If we keep standing together, we can make a change.
Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a very important day for all of us. It celebrates the life of one man who helped stop an entire system of injustice and inequality. This was a powerful sacrifice for such a person, endangering himself for the safety and security of millions of black people who were being segregated from housing to finding jobs to even the public fountains. Not to mention, were being treated with hostility and violence by many white people. Eventually, the cost of this bravery became his life, after being shot in the back on the balcony of his hotel room. Martin Luther King Jr. had laid down his life for the collective lives of millions of people. In his peaceful attempts to desegregate the world, he was beaten, jailed, and even killed. But he never gave up the dream he had, the dream that eventually changed the world, the dream that helped segregate most of the world and promote the fact that Black lives matter as much as anyone else's, the dream that became reality. All because of one man's bravery to stand up to a great injustice and a dream of a better future for all. Martin Luther King Jr. Day has been being celebrated for about 38 years now, and now we can see how far we have come from the days of segregation that Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in. There is no denying that there is still much racial inequality and tension in life today, but thanks to the heroic bravery of Martin and everyone else who has made a stand against these inequalities, we have made a significant change to this. Today, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a chance to think about how we can make our change ourselves. It doesn't even have to be a big change at all. If it makes a change to someone's day or helps them somehow, it is a change that is worth making. This is one way to recognize Martin Luther King Jr. Day in life today. But there's much more that Martin can help us recognize on this day. For instance, what kind of message does Martin Luther King Jr. try to convey it to us? One message that helps us recognize is that of the illusion of separation. In the popular show Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the characters brings up the concept of illusions in life today that are often thought of as real. As he says, the greatest illusion of this world is the illusion of separation. Things you think are separate and different are actually one and the same. Martin Luther King Jr. helped to teach us that segregation is just a way of utilizing this in unfair and unjust ways. The basis of segregation was the color of one's skin being directed into the specific categories of black and white. If we think of this separation as an illusion, we can start to see that people aren't black or white, but that certain people have different colored skin, and that those colors are actually just differently oriented pigments found in people's skin, showing that these people are actually not very different from each other at all. In the renowned children's book The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss, these differences are conveyed in the presence of a star on one's belly. Those who did not have a star were left out of many things and were not treated well. This book conveyed the problems of segregation and why it was unnecessary. In the book, Mr. Monkey McBean comes along and he mixes up everyone so that it is suddenly meaningless to have a star on your belly, expressing the idea that if people mingled and came together as people, not black or white, it would then mean nothing to anyone if you were once classified as black or white. Just human beings. This is the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. Not just that the world can be desegregated, but that people will no longer be just classified as white or black, just human beings. Another message that Martin brings us is how to love each other. Before Martin Luther King Jr. became an active civil rights activist, he was a pastor at the Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church. During his time as a pastor, he loved how to love everyone no matter what. One of the most important passages of the Bible is, "And love your neighbor as you love yourself," which tells us to love everyone in the same way as you love yourself. Martin Luther King Jr. managed to do this and loved accordingly. When he became part of the civil rights movement, his beliefs were put to the test. During his quest for equality, he was beaten, called rude names, jailed, and more, but he managed to still love everyone equally. He and his followers made it a core objective never to strike back, no matter what. As another quote from the Bible goes, "If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also," meaning that if you are struck, do not strike back, simply turn away. As he and his followers were beaten and jailed, they managed to turn away, like he had learned from the Bible in his days as a pastor. This kept situations from escalating and eventually helped Martin achieve his goals of desegregation. Martin Luther King Jr. can teach us here that love always prevails no matter what. So here we are, 38 years from the founding of Martin Luther King Day, amidst rising tensions and inequality. In these troubled times, it is good to remember Martin Luther King Jr. and what he can teach us. So I leave you with these 3 messages now, hoping that you will be able to learn from Martin and his accomplishments, and that we will soon come out of this state of anxiety and turmoil. Number 1, try to do something for someone else to help change their day for the better. Number 2, do not live in the illusion of separation, but instead see people for who they are and how they are good human beings. Number 3, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Learn from Martin Luther King Jr. and his love of other people and try to love others as well. And as always, remember Martin Luther King Jr. and his accomplishments for the good of the Black community. Have a great Martin Luther King Jr. Day, everyone. Thank you.
Martin Luther King has made a big effect on the world today. He had the strength and courage to stand up and speak for what is right, equality. At his time of existence, the color of your skin mattered. It determined your value and worth as a human being. People were beaten, killed, and attacked just for the color of their skin. It was a terrible time for any person of color. It was unfair and unequal, and he had something to say about it. He stood up for the freedom and equality for everyone, and his dream was where people wouldn't judge others on the color of their skin, but on their character. He was the leader of the civil rights movement, and he would only hold peaceful protests. He set the path to equality and freedom for America, yet his dream still hasn't been fully accomplished. Even so, it has come a long way due to his bravery and fearlessness of standing up for the good of all people. He is able to affect me by making the world just an overall better place and setting standards for equality, using his voice to speak for the rights of others. He always chose love over hate, no matter in what situation. So now today, we honor him. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Once upon a time, there's a man named Martin Luther King Jr. It's funny to think about because now we know his name so well, but at one time he was just a kid. Like maybe you're a kid watching this. Well, he was a kid too. Well, maybe you're a grown-up. That's okay too. Former kids are welcome here. I don't discriminate. Martin Luther King grew up to be a great man, of course, but things weren't all that great in the world while he was growing up. Not everybody was treated like they were somebody, and I believe that you should treat everybody like it's their birthday, but they didn't do that. People looked at the color of their skin, and that's how they decided if they were friends or not. Not cool, man. That didn't make him feel good. That didn't make anybody feel good. But his parents helped him grow up. He went to church. He learned about love. He grew up to be a minister to help a lot of people. He did all sorts of cool stuff. He helped a lot of people learn about love too. But still, he looked around and said, things should be better. He wanted to change things, so he did stuff. He decided, instead of spreading the hate, he would spread the love. He wanted to bring people together. Where people were hurting, he stepped in to help. He marched with them. He walked with them. He walked arm in arm with everyone. And sometimes it didn't go well, but he kept going. Sometimes he ended up in prison, but he kept going. Some people didn't like him, but he kept going. Some days were hard, but he kept going. Love does that. It just keeps going, even when things are dark. And, well, I don't like this part of the story, but things did get pretty dark. Someone who didn't agree with him shot him. He died in April 1968. Now keep pressing it. Why are you telling us this sad story? Come on. I know. I'm sorry, but it happened. I don't like that happened. Now I gotta tell you something. When things aren't awesome, it can be tough. And things will always be awesome, but your response can be. Martin Luther King's response? It was awesome. Today I just wanted us to think about this. Isn't it cool that we can change things? Like any of us, anybody. He dreamed and he changed things. And he dreamed and he kept sharing his dreams. They became not just his dream, a lot of people's dream. Like this one. I have a dream that little black boys and black girls will join hands with white boys and white girls and become sisters and brothers. That's a pretty good dream. Let's dream like that. That could change things.